Hi, welcome to the Shepherd's Rest Dog Talk. This is a special episode for Passover.
Yes, we're going to be looking at the reading which comes from Exodus 12 for the Passover event. Now this week, on Friday evening, is Passover, going into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So hopefully you are either already celebrating it or thinking about looking at it. So this week we want to discuss just some things that you might think about that link to the importance of Passover.
Okay.
First thing, let's talk about Passover and sometimes the confusion of that. Passover is considered a week-long event. However, the Passover is on the 14th of Nisan, and that night going into the 15th of Nisan. The 15th of Nisan is what begins the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That is the true 7 days. So really, I guess it's kind of more of an 8-day event. Because what happens with the lambs, when there was a temple, the lambs were brought. That was on the 14th. So if you take the 14th to the 21st, that's where we get the 8 days. Right. The Feast of Unleavened Bread starts on the 15th. So Friday night at sundown is when we will be celebrating the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now I bring this up because sometimes people get confused and the focus gets a little confusing. So let's really kind of think about or look at the different focuses. You know, we often talk about the lamb, and that's usually all we talk about. And I say we as in the Christianity, it's the lamb, it's lamb. Absolutely, that's important. That's on the 14th. But then we don't tend to understand the rest of the week, which is the Matzah, the unleavened bread. Okay? That is, if you notice, the actual feast itself is called the Feast of Matzah. And if we see that or we can look at that in 12:17, it says, "And you shall guard the festival of Matzah, for on this day I brought your divisions out of the land of Egypt, and you shall guard this day throughout your generation, an everlasting law." Okay, forever.
You know what I see here is unity. It's him bringing everyone out of Egypt and uniting his people into one. Yeah. And when we all partake of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and we're all eating the matzah every day, we are, reenacting that unity.
Right. Yes, I like that. And there's nowhere in Scripture that says you have to be clean to eat matzah, to eat unleavened bread. You had to be clean if you're going to participate in eating the lamb.
Right.
But if you're going to eat the matzah, there's nothing that says you have to be clean for that. So you can participate in that throughout the week. When we look at chapter 12, and we see in chapter 12:13 the importance of the blood upon the door, right? That's how the curse basically passes over you. And I know we go Passover, but if you see it more like Passover, like to protect. He protects, he guards. Well, isn't that what he does in end times with his people? He takes them in, he guards them. Protects them. It's the same thing. Again, we see a lot of end time prediction or patterns from what happens leading up to this Passover and into the wilderness.
That really just depends on what side of the coin you're on, whether or not you're within that protection.
Absolutely.
He gave a command to put the blood. If you were obedient to his command, you were protected. Same thing in Revelation with the churches, the 7 churches. If you're heeding his word, which is what he says, and you remain true to it and you guard it, you will be protected. But they're the only ones.
Right.
Everyone else is either thrown into it, or he comes like a thief, or,
all the things that happen to those who didn't put the blood over the door.
Right.
Yeah. It says in chapter 11, it says, "And there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, which has never been or ever shall be again." And that's in verse 6. That means even at the end of times, what happens, it will never be as great of a cry as what happened here.
Wow.
Now, let's look at, we know that Israel is being pulled out, right? A nation is being birthed from another nation. But we also have a bride being called out.
Yeah.
Many are called, but few are chosen, right?
Right.
They come out. Well, again, isn't that what's going to happen in the end times? There's the bride that's being called out, all right? But, just those out there, that bride was called out and brought to Sinai. And then there was a choice made there, which determined what the rest of the journey looked like.
Right. True.
I would say we have the calling. We go to Sinai, and then we have a choice of what the rest of that walk looks like.
Right.
Now, the matzah, I want to bring that up. While we don't talk about it very often, I want to really focus on that because in Leviticus, last week's Torah portion, Leviticus 8, or actually 7 and 8, we see in 8 where the priests are being dedicated, right?
Right.
And in chapter 7, we're seeing where there's all this leaven and unleavened bread and the cakes, and then that transfers over to chapter 8 where we have Aaron being told that they're to eat of this every day. They have 7 days outside, okay, and they're eating this. And this is a part of the ordination for them to become priests.
Okay.
Well, then I started looking at what's happening here. This is 7 days of eating unleavened bread. So let's look at it like this. When the Lord first called Israel out, okay, granted, yes, to be a bride, but there are all these different roles. But he also was setting them apart to be able to be in their midst. Adam and Eve walked with the Lord. Now Israel is going to be walking with the Lord. Abraham walked with the Lord, Isaac, Jacob, but it was different. It wasn't with it wasn't as a large group. It wasn't with his visual presence, felt presence there, like Israel's going to be. So they had to be prepared. And a part of the preparing them, like priests and kings, right, for the nations, is having them set apart so that he can dwell among them. And we often say, oh, well, we call it matzah because their bread didn't have time to rise while they were traveling. However, if we see in chapter 12, verse 8, it says, and they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire, with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Well, he's telling them here, before they've left, they have time right now for their bread to rise, because this is 10 days at least prior, because they're going to pull out the lamb.
Yeah.
So they have plenty of time to let it rise.
Right.
Yet, he's like, no, don't let it rise. So I learned something interesting. I don't know if this is true. I'm putting this out there, because
I did think this was really interesting.
Yeah. You want to say it?
Sure.
Okay. Right.
What she learned, or what she heard, was that Egypt was the first group of people to put leavening in bread to make it rise. That before that, it was not something that puffed up really big.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
So if that's the case, by the Lord saying just unleavened bread, he's basically saying go back to what your forefathers did.
Right.
Don't add that part. Don't add the part that Egypt gave you.
Yeah.
In our communion. Now, I'm not saying that leavened bread is bad at all. No. He's just she doesn't need it. But at this point, the Lord's having to separate, right? Mm-hmm. The Egyptians and the Israelites.
You got to look different.
Right. You got to look different. And he says, not as you're coming out to draw to me, I don't need the extra yeast. I don't need the extra puffing up.
Yeah.
We need to be flat.
Yeah.
Let's have that communion.
Yes.
All right.
And so visual of being humble and being prideful.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you got the pride and the humbleness. And by adhering to the 7 days of unleavened bread, isn't that what we're doing? We're saying we are going to be obedient. We're humbling ourselves before the Lord and doing what he asked us to do.
Yeah. And it also speaks of in chapter 13 to not even let leaven be found in your borders.
Yeah.
I mean, not in your house, in your area. Don't let it be there.
Right.
Because again, if this is a touch of Egypt, I mean, isn't that the whole thing, trying to get Egypt out of them? Don't we always say, you could take the Israelite out of Egypt, but it was hard to get Egypt out of the Israelite.
Right.
Well, this was the first step of it. Take this out.
Right.
And then, if you think about it, they brought only about 7 days worth of food.
Yeah.
And then after that, what happens? The Lord provides manna for them.
That's right.
Okay, let's now look at Aaron.
His bread.
Yes, his bread. That's right, which probably wasn't puffy. So
Just saying.
Now let's look at Aaron in chapter 8. They're there for 8 days. Then after that, what happens? Israel brings, the Lord provides for them by Israel bringing
their sacrifices,
their breads and their meats, and that's what fed the priest.
Yeah.
So again, you see that parallel
pattern,
yes, of how we have Israel came out to be the priestly, to be able to closely dwell with him, but of course that's lost at the that privilege goes down to a smaller group, which is Aaron's. But, okay, so here's another thing I thought of. Mm-hmm. here in chapter 12, we have the whole nation, right? And he's
Yes.
like, take the lamb, but don't cut him up.
Yeah.
Keep him whole.
Right.
I'm like, right, because it's a whole nation.
Yes.
But with the priest now, he is not. The command in that ordination is to cut him in pieces. Cut him in pieces.
Right.
Because it's not all of Israel getting to partake like that.
Right.
Not in that closeness. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm like, oh my gosh. Wow. Those firstborn that come out as the nation in Exodus 12, and now the first chosen of the inheritance, which is the priest. Do you see that? How close they are? What that tells me is the fact that he said never stop doing the whole lamb. Okay. Now again, that whole lamb is not a whole lamb anymore, because once you go to the temple, there's a way to do it. But never stop commemorating and telling the story of this, because one day we will be back as a whole.
Oh, very
but
good.
we can't participate. We can't partake in that until we're actually there. When Messiah is here and it's done, North and South are back together. Jew and Gentile are all one. The bride is where she should be. The body is where he is. Everything is the way it should be. Then we will partake of that wholeness, like you said, the unity once again.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised at all if a part of that, once we get into the millennium, isn't done again in Passover. Right. Because all those things, we know this from Ezekiel. All of these are still going to happen in the millennium. Passover, all of them, first fruits, every single one of them will continue to happen.
Right. So you want to hear something kind of cool I thought about this year? All right. So I was reading in Revelation 12, and I just love Revelation. And anyway, let me get to it. All right, verse 6. Okay, so Revelation 12 is all about the woman. And you know, this past fall, we saw the sign of the woman with the 12 stars. Yeah, in the stars. Clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet. You know, it was this big event. All right, so now it talks about the dragon who stands before her. And then John talks about another sign, which is separate from that sign. Here's another sign. So it says, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by Elohim to be nourished there 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years.
Right.
So if we believe that Yeshua is going to come again, right? And that's going to be, in the fall feasts. Right? So if you go back 3.5 years before that, where this woman is being protected, that would be Passover.
Yeah.
That would be like another Exodus.
Yeah.
That could be the big Exodus, you know, that's talked about.
And remember Elijah in Malachi? Yeah, in Malachi 4 is where we see that Elijah, you know, he's the one that prepares the way.
Right.
He's the one that brings back the father or the children to the fathers. And that doesn't mean your daddy and your son. It means the children back to the fathers of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is what that means. So there's no confusion. Absolutely that's happening.
Right.
Absolutely. I'm not saying Elijah's here or anything. I'm just saying it's just interesting to be aware of what's going on around.
Right.
Whether that strengthens the coming of Elijah, whether it's the spirit of Elijah, which does that, and that's the coming of Elijah. There's all kinds of things. And absolutely, 100%, my thought process is when it happens, we'll know it.
Yes.
And until then, the great thing is getting to search it out and see how it lines up with the patterns of Scripture.
Right. Well, what I loved about what you just said a second ago was that when Israel came out of Egypt, after 7 days, then he prepared manna for them. He had manna. And then the priests, after 7 days, then the food was brought to them, prepared for them. And here it says that she spends time out where Elohim has prepared a place for her.
Yeah.
So again, she will be provided for. Yes. Right. You know, sometimes we get so caught up and, we got to, hoard this and hoard that and save this and save that. And, I don't know, depending on who the woman is, I guess, we know that at least she will be looked after. Right. And, they're and nourished. Right. And I can't help but think of the Church of Philadelphia. The Church of Philadelphia is kept from the hour of trial.
Right. And what that means, what it looks
we don't
like,
know.
But we know the promise of his hand being over them.
Right. Whether that's in the heavenlies or here in the wilderness or whatever it means. All right. Now, one more thing that I want to talk about that I saw was in Exodus 12:42. Okay. It says, "It is a night of watches unto Yahweh for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is that night of watches unto Yahweh for all the children of Israel throughout their generations." So here's what I thought was interesting about that. The word watches is shimur. Okay. It's only used one time in the Bible. No, twice. And it's in this verse.
Both are in that verse?
Yes, because it says this is a night of watches. Right. And then it says this is a night of watches to all the children of Israel. Almost like two events. Yeah. All right. Now, hang on. This is the only time that word watch is a noun and not a verb.
Interesting. Oh, because it is the watch. Gotcha.
It's like an event. Yes. It is an event. And what does he say? Gird your loins. Right. Be ready to leave in haste. Right? Yeah. What is the second Exodus going to look like? Girding your loins, ready to leave in haste.
Whatever it is, being prepared is absolutely right.
But it's the only one that he says that they're supposed to eat it like that. Right. With your loin, ready to go.
Yeah, ready to go. Right.
Ready. Being watchful, but that watch is a noun and not a verb. I just think that's so. Yes,
it is so telling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway,
you had said, Julie had said the other day when we were working out, it was so good. We were talking about other ways that in Passover, the other fulfillments we see, and we were talking about the types of offerings that it represents. So while it is a peace offering, right, that it has to be, eaten within the day. The fact that it can't be held to the next day, it has to be, yes, a peace offering, but it has to be a Thanksgiving offering. So we're like, oh, so that means that they're actually being thankful for what? For the fact that they've been in bondage for however many years?
Right.
The fact that they're coming out. So we see this, be thankful for all things. They don't know what's coming, but they're thanking the Lord. And then Julie brought the point up that, and as a peace offering, the peace offering is always done outside of the door, outside the tent of meetings. And if we rely heavily on the point, I guess, that Yeshua died on the Temple Mount, on the Mount of Olives, facing the Temple Mount, which would have put him as at the door, looking at it. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about that. So again, we see another fulfillment of what he was doing on the cross. And of course,
and we know that Yeshua was a peace offering.
Absolutely.
I mean, when we talked about that in previous talks on the Brit Hadashah, when he had the Last Supper, that was a peace offering. Right. Everything they went through was the peace type offering.
Because the peace offering she's speaking of doesn't mean like how peace. It means like can commune together.
Yes.
To be able to come in and have that communion that we lost at Adam, because he's the second Adam. Right. He's restoring that ability to commune.
Right. He is the peace offering lamb, the one who goes in between us and the Lord.
Right. Just like he's also the continual offering, the lamb that is again between.
Yeah, he fulfilled all of them.
Absolutely. So. And remember in chapter 12:16, we have the blood, the Aleph Tav blood. So he's actually looking for the Messiah's blood to be over us. And that's what he brings in.
Right.
Because we all have to be, under the same. Like she said, there's a unity. And, that seems to be a point that we don't have real good skills at being unity.
Well,
but we're getting better.
Yes.
I say we as in the worldwide.
Yes. Well,
church.
I think that when the Lord does something, you can see the perversion out in the world, right? And so the perversion is coexistent. Let's all coexist and let's all be united, together, humanity, right? And what the Lord wants to do is be united in Him.
Yeah.
So as He is uniting us back to Him through His Word, through Yeshua, the living Torah, and the written Torah, right?
Yeah.
He's reuniting us. We see that perversion out in the world of the coexistence And what's funny is as he's calling us to be holier and holier, more and more set apart, we're going to be at odds with that coexistent agenda.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this special edition of Doc Talk, the Passover edition.
Yeah. And we'd like to just let you know that we are aware of all the noise around us between the crickets, the dogs barking, the extra wind, and a few cars going by. We apologize, but that's what happens when you're on the dock with nature. Nature happens.
Nature calls. All right. Well, again, we hope you have a fantastic Passover Seder and a fantastic week of unleavened bread.
Yes,
and
remember
that He is the reason for this season.
What? Yeah, He is.
All right. Well, we will see you next week with our regular episode of Doc Talk. Shalom. Hi. Welcome to the Shepherd's Rest Doc Talk. This is not an episode, but a special talking or just a special little thing on Passover.
It's a Passover Doc Talk, but don't pass it over.
Okay, can we do that over?
Yeah.